You know, when you translate something from film to television, it's different than just making a sequel. You know, you have to convince the audience that you understand what the original movie is.
Our humble home planet has always had an important role to play in the Alien franchise. It's where Ellen Ripley spent much of her life, where the Weyland-Yutani Corporation is headquartered, and the place a few scrappy space truckers / colonial marines / knucklehead mercenaries have repeatedly had to protect from xenomorph infestation.
Let's rock!
Yet despite its prominence in the plot, Earth has never been the setting for an Alien movie, and we've only ever had a glimpse of what it looks like during the series timeline. That all changes with FX's Alien Earth, which takes place almost entirely on the planet's surface, all while maintaining the recognisable look and feel of the franchise. To learn how they did it, we spoke to the show's creator and director, Noah Hawley, who revealed how he and his team avoided dystopian cliches, crafted a new retro-futuristic aesthetic, and why there's a little Blade Runner in this version of Alien. The blasted, near-inhospitable surfaces of planets like LV-426 and Alien Romulus's Jackson Star colony could easily lead you to believe that the entire galaxy is a harsh, miserable place. Alien Earth dispels that idea in seconds. Its vision of Earth in the year 2120 is incredibly recognisable. Sure, there are a few extra giant megatowers dominating the skyline, but this world is clearly very much our own, yet to collapse into a cyberpunk dystopia a la Blade Runner's perpetually rainy Los Angeles. Still, it was important to establish that this version of Earth is not the one we live on today, and so the shooting location was carefully chosen.
I mean, part of the reason that we went to Bangkok is it has a skyline that most Western audiences aren't familiar with. And therefore, you know, we don't have to augment it as heavily as we might otherwise, but you know, a lot of it is, I mean, the reason to set the show there and in that time period, you know, it's about relatability and accessibility. And as you said, you move into a dystopian reality. People are already like, well, that's not my reality. You know, I don't know why the future's always brutalist.
It's not just the buildings that aren't brutalist either. Hawley avoided the harsh, brutal depiction of corporations the franchise has traditionally used, opting instead for something that communicated intense wealth and status.
The thing about what Ridley and James Cameron were facing was a sort of Weyland-Yutani Corporation that was this nameless, faceless bureaucracy of capitalism. But that's not what capitalism now. Capitalism is you know, billionaires, you know, celebrities, right? It's you know, it's literally an individual who is using their money and whim, basically, you know, to control their part of the world. What I love about Ridley's movie is it's such a 70s movie. And then Cameron's movie is such an 80s movie, right? Like, on some level, Alien reflects the decade in which it's made. You know, Fincher's is a very 90s film. So, you know, I think if the capitalism of the show has to reflect the moment that we're in. If it was this sort of 1984 dystopia, we would look at it and go, well, that's not my world. I can't relate to that, really. It's not that it would be a bad story, it just wouldn't feel relatable.
Hawley's vision was to develop a world that did not subscribe to the popular idea of dystopia. Yes, there would need to be some truly chilling concepts underpinning this undesirable future, but it was important that this world support believable human characters, rather than husks crushed beneath the heel of capitalism. The key to that was balance.
You know, one of the things aesthetically that doesn't really translate cinematically is that in the script I had this, you know, it's literally there's humanity plus, and there's humanity minus, and there's humanity prime, right? And Hermit lives in the humanity minus section, and people can't afford their own places, right? So he just lives with this family, and he has a sheet for a you know, privacy, see-through, whatever, for privacy. But I didn't want it to be dystopian in a way. There's a lot of animated movie references, and one that's not on the screen but was part of the conversation that I had with Alex Lothar was WALL-E, right? I mean, Wally is alone, but he's not sad, right? He has Hello Dolly, he has his cockroach, he's performing his function, he's going home at the end of the day, he has his space. I didn't want it to be a sad thing. He's grieving clearly, but there is a positivity.
The Earth that Hermit lives on is governed by 5 corporations: Weyland-Yutani, Prodigy, Lynch, Dynamic, and Threshold. After years of exclusively focusing on Weyland-Yutani, the series now turns its attention to Prodigy. This shift demanded that Hawley and his team devise a completely new aesthetic for the corporation's technology, weapons, and physical spaces.
It took a while, and we went through different iterations, and over the course of the 5 years it took to make it, there was more than one production designer who was on, and it is a complex thing because the only aesthetic of Alien is a Weyland-Yutani aesthetic. It's a different company, and they're not all going to look the same, but it can only look so different. It can't be an Apple store, right? Because now it's more like Star Trek, which is a different science fiction brand. This is where climate change came in handy, because then you go, well, the Earth is getting hotter and the oceans are rising, and so, technology hates water, right? And you've moved up from the sort of grunt space trucker engine room feel of it. Now we're with the trillionaire, right? But even so, it's like that they're still fighting the mold. They're still fighting off the water intrusion. I mean, that fungus, those mold scrubbers characters that we brought in, all of that stuff is in order to bring the identity of Alien as something where something's always dripping, right? Into the Neverland world.
Yes, Neverland, as in the home of Peter Pan. It wasn't enough that Prodigy would look different to Weyland-Yutani. It had to act differently. It had to want different things. So if the horrifying goal of Weyland-Yutani is to gain control of one of the most deadly things in the universe, what is the creepy aim of Prodigy? Well, only the thing every billionaire wants: the secret to eternity. But beneath that base desire is a deeper connection between Prodigy and Disney's classic cartoon.
I mean, it starts with, playing around with, humanity and synthetic beings and cyborgs and synths and hybrids and, those ideas, and then this idea of children in adult bodies, because if what you're talking about is humanity and do we deserve to survive, who's more human than a child, right? And so now once they're children in adult bodies, now they're the children who never grew up, really. And so the Peter Pan analogy comes in that way. And then the idea that the CEO of the corporation that has made them is himself a child genius, a prodigy, and sees himself as Peter Pan.
You'll watch them? And they can follow orders. I mean, you can follow orders, right?
Sir, yes, sir.
Transporting the story of Alien to a planet the series had never truly explored before meant that much of it was inevitably going to feel fresh and new. But Alien Earth is still the latest chapter in a series with a 46-year legacy. For Hawley, there were a couple of main anchor points. First, of course, was the xenomorph itself, one of the most recognisable creatures in all of cinema. But then there was the visual language of Alien, the dreamlike crossfades, the 1970s film grain, motifs like a computer display reflected in a helmet's visor. All of that and more can be found in an episode of Alien Earth.
When you translate something from film to television, it's different than just making a sequel. You have to convince the audience that you understand what the original movie is, right? And you also signal in sort of literally using some of the setup from the first movie. You're signaling to the audience, we're doing the first movie, right? There's 6 more, but we're doing the first movie. So we shot on anamorphic lenses. We used zoom lenses, which are very 70s kind of feeling. But yeah, there was a design challenge to it and a cinematic challenge. That's part of the fun of it.
Even within the new, you can expect many of the same sound effects or visual cues that were in the original film. Computers still make that thunk when fully loading an application. Mother's visual interface still makes the same rolling clacker noise as it types out orders in the same flickering green font. It even goes beyond the in-universe, with each episode's end credits replicating the soft-edge fonts of Ridley Scott's 1979 classic.
I think those design choices are also there to signal because, Ridley did in Prometheus. He came back and he said, well, I know this is a prequel, but I'm not going to do retrofuturism. I'm going to have holograms and I'm going to do this modern technology and it's going to look like the future actually looks like, right, versus what they thought it would look like. And, we had to tell the audience, like, we're not doing that, right? He came along, he did that. That was how he wanted to play with that material the second time around. This is where we're living. We're living in the retrofuturism of the first two films.
While the show itself is uncontestably set in the world of Alien, the story's heavy focus on the creation and use of synthetics, cyborgs and hybrids means there are long sections with a somewhat different feel to traditional Alien. Through subtle adjustments to pacing, direction and framing, it's almost as if the show drifts into being Blade Runner at times.
I think it's inescapable. I don't think Ridley can escape it, right? He made two movies that are complementary. In one, he made a monster movie that hands off to a synth movie that then hands off to a literal synth movie, and the aesthetic of Alien and the aesthetic of Blade Runner, you could easily believe that Blade Runner is the Earth of Alien, right? So, there are those echoes that are unavoidable. Anytime you dig down on artificial intelligence, you're going to end up in the neighborhood.
After 46 years of barren colonies, dingy prisons and industrial starships, Alien Earth finally provides an in-depth look at the planet Ellen Ripley fought so hard to protect. And thanks to the striking world created by Noah Hawley and his team, it's certainly been worth the wait. For more from FX's Alien Earth, check out our in-depth exploration of the show's new alien creatures and its redesigned xenomorph, as well as our full season review. And for everything else, stick with IGN.